Hey guys, tonight we're about to dive into something you might not expect to find in the quiet of your evening. Picture this. You're standing in the heart of ancient Egypt, and the air is thick with the scent of sweet resins, incense, and delicate oils. The sun is low, casting long shadows across the stone streets, and around you, people walk by in flowing linen garments, leaving behind a trail of perfume in their wake. The smell of lotus and frankincense permeates everything. You probably won't survive this. You'd be too enchanted by the constant cloud of fragrance that lingered around nearly everything in ancient Egypt. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. I'm curious how far this ancient journey stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Perfume in ancient Egypt wasn't just about smelling nice. It wasn't about a quick spritz before heading to the party. No, my friend, it was something far more mystical, spiritual, and even political. You see, scent in ancient Egypt was considered a divine gift, one that connected people to the gods. Every breath of fragrant air was thought to carry the prayers of the living straight to the heavens, helping to maintain balance in the world and honoring the gods who kept the universe in check. But that's just the surface. The real magic lies in how these powerful fragrances were created in the first place. Perfumers, those skilled artisans, were some of the most revered individuals in Egyptian society. They weren't simply people who mixed oils and flowers. They were, in many ways, seen as healers and protectors of the divine. Historians still argue whether they were regarded more as scientists, artists, or perhaps something in between, but what we do know is that their role was integral to the culture. Every high priest, queen, and pharaoh trusted their craftsmanship. Let's begin at the beginning, because perfume's importance was rooted deep in religion and the divine. Egyptians believed that the gods themselves smelled good, divine, fragrant beings with an aura of scent that represented their purity, power, and presence. Perfume, as a material manifestation of this divinity, was considered a link between the earth and the gods. When you wore perfume in ancient Egypt, it was as though you were offering up a prayer, and the scent itself would rise up and fill the heavens. Incense and perfume were often used in temples to honor gods, an act that helped ensure a continuous connection between humans and their divine counterparts. The gods didn't just hear prayers, they smelled them too. The Egyptians created what were called scented offerings, which could be as simple as a burning stick of frankincense or as elaborate as a bouquet of oils presented in gold flasks. Now, imagine being in a temple, incense thick in the air, and you're standing before an altar where priests are making offerings. You, as a worshiper, would likely have been part of this ritual, breathing in the sacred scents, aligning yourself with the divine through the power of smell. But this isn't just about devotion. It's about something much more essential: control over fate, health, and fortune. Of course, not everyone could make their own perfume. It was an elite profession, kept mostly for royalty, the priesthood, and the wealthy. The ingredients were often rare, expensive, and difficult to acquire, especially considering how long it took to harvest and prepare them. Many of the raw materials were shipped from distant lands: frankincense from the Arabian Peninsula, myrrh from East Africa, and lotus petals from the Nile. The process was time-consuming, but for the Egyptians it was a form of sacred labor that connected them with their gods. Historians still debate how much of this ancient art was based on trial and error versus some kind of divine inspiration. There's the argument that the perfumers were simply excellent scientists of their time, understanding chemistry and the natural world on a deeper level than most of us realize. But others say there was a certain mysticism surrounding the profession. Perhaps the ingredients were just as sacred as the gods themselves. As we move forward into this story, we'll discover how the process of perfume making wasn't just about blending oils. It was about an intricate dance between science, spirituality, and the elements. And in a land as mystical as Egypt, the act of creating a scent had far-reaching implications. You weren't just creating something to make people smell nice. You were shaping the very forces of the universe. Let's pick up where we left off. Remember that divine connection we just spoke about? Well, perfume wasn't merely a luxury. It was an offering that the gods themselves would enjoy. The Egyptians believed the gods didn't just need food and drink. They needed scent as well, to fuel their senses and maintain cosmic order. The smell of perfume was thought to please them, and the gods, in turn, would bestow blessings upon the mortal realm. In fact, there were specific fragrances for specific gods. Each god had their own signature scent. Can you imagine? A divine fragrance catalog. It's a little surreal to think about, but that's exactly how essential scent was to Egyptian culture. One of the most famous gods associated with scent was Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Osiris was often depicted with a particular scent tied to his rituals. His perfume, believed to be made from myrrh and frankincense, would have been used in the mummification process. These fragrances weren't just about masking the smell of death. They were considered to have magical properties that helped ensure safe passage to the afterlife. But perfumes weren't only about religious rituals. They also played a significant role in the daily lives of ordinary Egyptians. Whether you were royalty or a commoner, wearing perfume signaled status and cleanliness. It was one of the most important markers of personal grooming, alongside bathing and cosmetic use. In fact, perfume became a symbol of wealth, power, and refinement. The more fragrant oils you could afford, the more respected you were in society. Now, I bet you're thinking, sure, we've heard of Cleopatra's famous perfumes, but how did they actually make them back then? Well, that's where things get fascinating. The recipes for perfume were carefully recorded in what were essentially the first ancient perfume recipe books. And these were more than just casual notes. These were sacred texts. The most famous perfume recipe we know of today comes from the Ebers Papyrus, a medical text from around 1500 BCE that detailed not only medicinal recipes, but also the essential oils and fragrances used by the Egyptians. In this document, we can see a whole section dedicated to perfumes. The recipes were intricate, listing the types of flowers, resins, and oils to be used, and often with specific instructions on how to combine them for maximum effect. Some of these recipes even called for exotic ingredients like cinnamon, cardamom, and saffron, which were traded across long distances. Historians still debate whether these recipes were widely used or reserved for the upper classes. It's likely that these divine concoctions were more accessible to the wealthy, given their cost, but it's also possible that the basic techniques for creating these perfumes were shared among a broader spectrum of society. The real art came in the blending process. Perfumers weren't just combining random ingredients, they were creating something far more complex, something that could invoke emotions, memories, and spiritual experiences. They understood how different scents could affect people on an emotional level. For instance, lotus, with its delicate sweetness, was used for peace and relaxation, while the sharp, intense scent of myrrh was believed to ward off evil spirits. It's almost like a precursor to aromatherapy, don't you think? But creating perfume wasn't all about luxury and gods. It also had a very practical side, especially when it came to embalming the dead. Ancient Egyptians, obsessed with the afterlife, believed that the body needed to be preserved to ensure the soul's safe journey. That's where perfumes came in again. The process of mummification involved not just wrapping the body in linen, but also applying oils and resins to keep it from decaying. These embalming perfumes were complex, often a blend of resin, frankincense, and myrrh, and were meant to protect the body from both decay and evil spirits. Interestingly, the embalming process also led to some of the most important discoveries about ancient perfumes. In 1858, archaeologists uncovered the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Inside, they found a vast array of perfume bottles, many of which still contained residue from the ancient oils. Scientists and archaeologists have spent years analyzing these remnants to understand what ancient Egyptians used in their embalming and perfuming processes. Historians argue whether the techniques and perfumes used for mummification were meant purely for spiritual reasons or whether there was also a desire to preserve the body for future use. Some scholars believe that perfume had a much broader significance than just religious rituals. It was a bridge between life and death, the physical and the divine. It's one of those questions that doesn't have a definitive answer, but it adds a fascinating layer of complexity to our understanding of the ancient Egyptian worldview. As we move on, we'll start to look at the tools and techniques that made the creation of these magical perfumes possible. So far, we've seen that scent was not just a luxury or a personal indulgence. It was essential to religion, health, and even the preservation of life. But how did the Egyptians manage to extract these scents from nature? That's where the real science begins. As we step deeper into the world of ancient Egyptian perfumery, let's get into the nitty-gritty of how these mesmerizing scents were actually created. The Egyptians didn't have modern technology, of course, but they had an incredible mastery of the natural world, especially when it came to extracting essential oils and creating fragrances that would make a modern nose swoon. If you think that perfumery is just about mixing oils, think again. The Egyptians turned scent making into a complex art form, using tools and techniques that would be considered cutting edge for their time. One of the most fascinating methods they used was maceration, a technique that's still used by some perfumers today. In this process, plant materials, flowers, leaves, and herbs were soaked in oils or fats, allowing the essential oils to be absorbed. This technique worked beautifully for flowers like jasmine, which doesn't release its fragrance until it's been gently crushed. The Egyptians likely used this method with their precious blooms, infusing oils that would later be used in perfumes or religious rituals. Then there's distillation, a technique that many believe the Egyptians invented. Distillation is the process of using steam to extract essential oils from plants. While historians still debate whether the Egyptians were the first to use this method, the Chinese are also credited with developing early distillation methods. What we do know is that they mastered it. By the time they were refining their techniques, they had a steady supply of oils from resins like frankincense and myrrh, which were burned as incense during religious ceremonies. Historians still argue over whether distillation was truly a deliberate invention of Egyptian perfumers, or whether it was just a happy accident. Maybe a pot of oil was left to boil too long, and they discovered that the steam could be captured and used. However it happened, the result was revolutionary. It allowed the Egyptians to extract not only the sweet-smelling flowers of the Nile, but also the deeper, more earthy aromas of resins and woods. But the process didn't end with distillation or maceration. No, that's just the start. The Egyptians used infusion, a method of steeping ingredients in oil or alcohol for a longer period, sometimes weeks or months. This allowed the fragrance to develop gradually and deepen in complexity. They would mix ingredients in clay jars or animal skin pouches, then leave them to sit, sometimes in the heat of the sun, allowing nature's elements to do the work. The result was a rich, potent oil that carried the essence of whatever plants or resins had been used. These oils were then combined in varying ratios to create unique fragrances, some for personal use, others for religious or medicinal purposes. Some of the most common ingredients used in Egyptian perfumes were frankincense, myrrh, lotus, and cedarwood. But the Egyptians weren't afraid to get a little more adventurous. They would blend spicy herbs like cinnamon and cardamom with floral notes, or pair resins like benzoin with rich woods like sandalwood. But creating perfume wasn't a simple task. The Egyptians used precise measurements when mixing scents, even though we don't have a concrete understanding of their measurement system. Some experts believe they used an early form of ratios, similar to how modern perfumers measure their blends and parts. The most famous recipe in Egyptian history is found on the Ebers Papyrus, a medical text that includes the first known recipe for a sacred Egyptian perfume. This particular scent was a blend of frankincense, myrrh, cedar, and spikenard, and it was meant for use in religious rituals, perhaps even for the embalming of royalty. Historians argue whether these exact formulas were widely used, or if they were more symbolic, offering a divine connection rather than just a sensory experience. Some scholars suggest that these perfumes were so sacred that they were only available to the elite, while others argue that they were much more widespread and available to the general populace. Regardless, the fact remains that scent making was a skill reserved for specialists, perfumers, who were highly regarded within their communities. It's also worth noting that ancient Egyptians had a very different concept of cleanliness than we do today. While we associate perfume with hygiene, the Egyptians didn't necessarily use fragrance to cover up unpleasant smells. Instead, it was all about creating an atmosphere of divinity, purity, and luxury. Bathing wasn't as common as it is today, so perfume helped mask the effects of daily life: sweat, cooking, and the like. Speaking of luxury, Egyptian perfume wasn't just for personal use. It was also used in the royal courts to communicate power and status. The higher up you were in Egyptian society, the more likely you were to wear perfumes that were intricately crafted with the finest materials. Pharaohs and queens like Cleopatra were known to use the most exquisite scents not just for personal pleasure, but to solidify their authority and divine right to rule. After all, if you smelled like the gods, you were more likely to be worshipped like one, right? Now, as we explore the lasting impact of these fragrances, we see that the ancient Egyptians had a deep understanding of the power of scent, not just to please, but to influence. From their religious offerings to their royal courts, scent was an essential part of daily life, weaving through the fabric of society, politics, and spirituality. Their meticulous methods of fragrance creation gave rise to an industry that, to this day, continues to captivate us. But how did these ancient perfumes survive for thousands of years? Let's take a look. Now, we're about to uncover one of the most fascinating aspects of ancient Egyptian perfumery: longevity. How in the world did perfumes, oils, and resins from thousands of years ago still hold their aroma today? The answer lies not only in the care with which they were created, but also in the meticulous methods of preservation that the Egyptians employed. You've likely heard of ancient perfume bottles being uncovered in tombs and still retaining traces of their original scent, but how did these fragrances last so long? Was it the quality of the raw materials or the method of storage? Let's see how the ancient Egyptians truly mastered the art of preserving scent. First off, the ancient Egyptians were geniuses at preserving organic matter. The same techniques they used to preserve the bodies of the dead, like mummification, also helped to keep their perfumes intact. Mummification was, at its core, a process of dehydration and sealing. By removing moisture from the body and then sealing it in resin-soaked linen, they prevented the decay process. The same principle was applied to their perfume bottles. These bottles, typically made of glass or clay, were sealed tightly to keep the fragrant oils safe from air and moisture, two things that can degrade scent over time. The key to the longevity of these perfumes lies in their ingredients. Frankincense, myrrh, and other resins were used for their preservative properties as well as their fragrance. These substances have natural antibacterial properties, which helped keep them from spoiling. The Egyptians also understood that oils like olive oil, when properly sealed, could last for a long time, even without refrigeration or preservatives. In a way, the perfume-making process itself was an early form of preservation, creating oils and scents that could withstand the passage of time. Historians still argue whether these ancient perfumes were designed to last for long periods, or if they were just a fortunate side effect of the way they were made. Some believe the Egyptians created long-lasting fragrances intentionally, while others suggest that it was more about creating a product for immediate use. Perfume bottles weren't intended to be heirlooms. But regardless of their original intent, these scents have certainly stood the test of time. Modern scientists and archaeologists have found that the fragrance in ancient Egyptian perfume bottles still exists, albeit in a faint form. It's a testament to the skill of the ancient Egyptian perfumers and their deep knowledge of natural materials. While the oils and resins used in ancient Egypt have held up remarkably well, their perfumes didn't just survive because of their sealing techniques, it also had to do with the climate of Egypt itself. The dry, arid environment of the Nile Valley naturally helped preserve many things, from papyrus scrolls to jars of oils. The lack of humidity, which causes molds and bacteria to thrive in other climates, played a significant role in the preservation of both the body and the scents the Egyptians held dear. Interestingly, archaeologists and scientists have recently started to recreate some of these ancient perfumes using the clues left behind. While they don't have exact formulas, they've been able to analyze residue found in tombs and sacred sites and reverse engineer some of the scents that would have been worn by pharaohs and priests. It's a bit of a modern-day alchemical experiment where researchers are trying to connect with the past through scent. This brings us to a peculiar part of Egypt's olfactory legacy, the perfume bottles themselves. These bottles weren't just practical vessels, they were works of art. Many of the most prized bottles were intricately carved, decorated with hieroglyphs, and made from materials like lapis lazuli and gold. Some were in the shape of animals, gods, and even pharaohs. The artistry of these bottles reflected the importance of the fragrance within, elevating perfume to the status of luxury. But it wasn't just about beauty. Their craftsmanship ensured that the precious oils inside would remain sealed for centuries. Perhaps one of the most famous perfume finds came in the form of the tomb of Tutankhamun. Inside the tomb, archaeologists discovered over 30 perfume jars, most of which still contained traces of oils. These jars were small, carefully sealed, and nestled amongst Tut's treasures. Modern scientists have worked tirelessly to recreate the scents found inside, even though the formulas were not written down. They've used the residue found in these jars, mixed with modern scientific techniques, to come as close as possible to recreating the very same fragrances that would have adorned the body of a young pharaoh over 3,000 years ago. Historians still argue whether Tutankhamun's perfumes were used for practical purposes, like daily grooming or mummification, or whether they were simply symbolic, reminders of his divine status and closeness to the gods. While we may never know the exact purpose of these perfumes, what's clear is that they played an important role in the Egyptian concept of immortality. To smell like a god, to have the scent of the afterlife, was a powerful statement that continued long after death. And here's where it gets a little eerie. Those perfumes didn't just endure in bottles or jars. Over time, these scents have seeped into the stories of ancient Egypt, into the mythologies and rituals. Every time someone burns incense or oils in modern-day temples or during a meditation session, It's like we're tapping into the very essence of ancient rituals that have lasted for millennia. But we're still left with a question. How much of this was intentional, and how much was simply the result of a happy accident? Did the Egyptians know their perfumes would last for thousands of years? Or did their understanding of preservation just happen to give us a glimpse into their world? Historians and scientists are still working to answer that question, but one thing is for certain. Ancient Egypt's mastery of perfume making is a legacy that will likely continue to captivate us for generations to come. Let's move beyond the preservation of Egyptian perfumes and dive into the broader cultural significance of scent. It's one thing to create something that lasts for thousands of years, but why was perfume so essential to ancient Egyptian society in the first place? Why did people, rich and poor alike, obsess over fragrance, especially in a culture that placed such heavy emphasis on spiritual life? Well, it's not just about smelling nice or making a good impression at the royal court. In ancient Egypt, perfume was a medium for communication, both with the gods and with each other. The Egyptians didn't just use perfume for personal grooming, it was also deeply embedded in their social rituals. It was a way to establish one's position in society. If you were wealthy, you could afford the best and most fragrant oils, which often meant that you had access to rare and precious ingredients that few others could get their hands on. In the royal courts, perfume signified both status and divine favor. Pharaohs and queens like Cleopatra, famous for her love of luxurious scents, used perfume as a form of self-expression. The carefully chosen fragrance was an extension of their power, radiating an air of majesty and influence that couldn't be ignored. But it wasn't just about impressing the nobles. Scent played an equally important role in religion and ritual. In temples, for example, priests would use incense and perfumes to create a spiritual atmosphere. The air would be thick with the heady fragrances of frankincense, myrrh, and lotus, elevating the worship experience to another level. The ancient Egyptians believed that when they burned these resins and oils, they were creating a sacred space where the divine could descend and commune with them. The gods weren't just listening to prayers, they were smelling them too. Perfume also had its place in Egyptian medicine. While the Egyptians didn't have the scientific understanding of modern medicine, they certainly knew how to use the natural world to their advantage. Certain scents were believed to have healing properties, and they were used to treat a variety of ailments. Myrrh, for instance, was often used for its antiseptic qualities, and frankincense was thought to be useful for respiratory issues. But it wasn't just about curing physical ailments. These perfumes were also believed to have an emotional and spiritual impact. Just as we might light a scented candle today to calm our nerves, the Egyptians used fragrances to bring peace of mind and emotional clarity. Historians still argue about the true extent of perfume's role in Egyptian medicine. Some scholars believe it was more symbolic than medicinal, meaning that the fragrances were used to help people feel better rather than directly heal them. Others suggest that the Egyptians were onto something long before we even understood the therapeutic power of certain scents. Whatever the case may be, it's clear that fragrance was far more than a luxury item. It was tied directly to both physical and spiritual well-being. On a more practical level, perfumes and oils also had their role in embalming. The embalming process, designed to preserve the body for the afterlife, involved applying layers of oils, resins, and fragrances. The body of a deceased person was carefully treated with these perfumes as part of the mummification process. This was seen not only as a method of preservation, but as a way of ensuring that the person's soul would journey safely into the afterlife. Some believe the use of such scents was also to mask the natural odors of decay, but they were equally symbolic, helping to guide the soul on its way to meet the gods. In Egypt's highly ritualistic culture, where life and death were closely linked, perfume helped create an atmosphere of sanctity and reverence. the offerings made to the gods often included a gift of perfume. The burning of incense at altars wasn't just for the smell. It was a way to communicate with the divine, allowing the worshiper to send their prayers on a wave of fragrance. Historians still debate whether incense and perfume were considered an offering or a way to invite the gods to visit and partake in the ritual. What's certain is that these materials carried deep spiritual significance, and their scent filled the air around the temples, creating a connection between humans and deities. And then there's the role of perfume in gift-giving. Perfumed oils weren't just personal luxuries, they were commonly exchanged as gifts between rulers and dignitaries. Perfume could be a diplomatic tool, a symbol of goodwill, and a way of sealing alliances. Kings and queens sent bottles of their best fragrances as tokens of favor, as much as they would send gold or precious stones. The rarest perfumes were often presented as a sign of respect and gratitude. When we think of perfume today, we might think of the little glass bottles we keep on our vanities or the spritz of fragrance we apply before a night out. But in ancient Egypt, perfume wasn't just something that added a pleasant scent to a room. It was a living, breathing part of society, integral to everything from royal life to rituals to the very concept of immortality. Whether it was for the gods, the pharaohs, or even the common people, perfume connected all of Egypt in ways that we're still trying to fully understand. Historians still debate the cultural importance of perfume in Egypt. Was it primarily for the elite? Was it a form of divine communication? Or was it something much more foundational to the everyday lives of the Egyptians? We may never know the full answer, but we can be certain of one thing. The Egyptians didn't just create perfumes. They created an entire culture around them, one that continues to influence the modern world of fragrance. As we move further along in our exploration of ancient Egyptian perfumery, we find ourselves immersed in the world of royalty, where scent wasn't just a luxury, it was a powerful symbol of authority and divine right. Pharaohs, queens, and nobility didn't just use perfumes for personal pleasure, they used them to communicate power, command respect, and even assert their connection to the gods. In ancient Egypt, perfume was a political tool, not just a fashion statement. Take Cleopatra, for example. The famed Queen of Egypt wasn't just known for her intelligence, charisma, and beauty. She was also renowned for her love of perfume. Cleopatra's perfume was said to be made from myrrh, frankincense, and the rarest rose oils, and she would wear it to seduce powerful Roman leaders like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Cleopatra didn't just rely on perfume for personal allure, she used it to command attention and project an image of divine authority. It's rumored that she had her perfumes specially created, and the unique formula was one of her most guarded secrets. It wasn't simply about smelling good, it was about sending a message to the men around her. I am a queen, and I have the favor of the gods. But Cleopatra wasn't the only one in the royal family who used scent as a form of political leverage. Pharaohs throughout history would have used perfumes in similar ways, both for personal adornment and to communicate their status to the court. The use of perfume was often part of a larger ritualistic presentation, where the pharaoh would be anointed with oils in front of the people, demonstrating his divine right to rule. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about manifesting divine favor in the eyes of his people and his court. The very scent of the pharaoh was an extension of his connection to the gods, and by imbuing himself with fragrance, he was symbolically reinforcing his position as both a ruler and a divine figure. When we think about the political implications of perfume in ancient Egypt, we see that it went beyond mere cosmetics. Perfume was a visual and olfactory representation of power. The Egyptian elite, from the pharaoh to the high priests, understood the psychology of scent. They knew that a carefully chosen fragrance could sway emotions and influence behavior. When a pharaoh entered a room, for example, the fragrance he wore would immediately announce his arrival, reinforcing his dominance over the space. In the royal courts, these scents weren't just for show. The very process of applying perfume could become part of a ceremonial act, a ritual that elevated the individual to a higher status. Perfume, along with robes, jewelry, and other adornments, helped the royals project an image of divinity and immortality, traits that were essential for a ruler in ancient Egypt. The act of being anointed with perfume was seen as an act of being chosen by the gods themselves. But what about the common people? While perfumes were largely reserved for the wealthy and the royal elite, it's important to note that they didn't hold a monopoly on fragrance. Middle-class Egyptians and even workers would often have access to simpler perfumes made from local flowers, herbs, and oils. While these perfumes weren't as extravagant as those worn by Cleopatra, they still played a significant role in daily life. In fact, many common Egyptians would have made their own scents, creating fragrances with ingredients found in their gardens or bought at the marketplace. Perfume was a part of the cultural fabric of Egypt. It wasn't just a tool for the elite. It was a way for all Egyptians to connect with their environment, their society, and their gods. Despite the wider availability of simpler scents, the best perfumes, the ones used for religious ceremonies, royal events, or diplomatic gifts, were often kept in the hands of high-ranking individuals. These luxurious perfumes were not only valuable because of their ingredients, but also because they were seen as divine tools. They were associated with powerful symbolism, elevating the wearer to a state of divinity and elevated purpose. Historians still argue whether the royalty's use of perfume was mostly for public display, or if it had more personal mystical significance. Some argue that the pharaohs, while they used perfume as a symbol of their divine right, also relied on scent to help them transcend their human limitations, creating an experience of heightened spirituality. In this sense, the perfume wasn't just a luxury, it was an instrument of ascension, allowing rulers to feel closer to the gods and more capable of ruling with divine favor. Perfume was so entrenched in the cultural identity of ancient Egypt that it became an essential element of funerary practices. It wasn't just for the living. The dead, especially the royals, were also bathed in perfumes and oils. This was part of the mummification process, where oils like myrrh and frankincense were used to preserve the body and keep it from decaying. The very scent of these oils was thought to guide the soul of the deceased into the afterlife, ensuring that their transition into the realm of the gods was as smooth as possible. Even beyond the pharaohs and queens, the Egyptian elite understood the importance of fragrance in creating a divine aura. Whether it was a high priest offering incense to the gods or a merchant presenting a luxury gift to a royal, perfume was always used to reinforce the power dynamics of ancient Egypt. The scent of luxury, power, and divine favor was always just a spritz away. In this way, we can see that perfume was deeply interwoven with the fabric of Egyptian life, from the daily rituals of the common people to the grand ceremonies of the royal court. Whether it was for personal pleasure, spiritual connection, or political power, perfume was an essential tool for communicating something far beyond just scent. Now that we've ventured deep into the realm of royalty and political power, let's take a step back and look at a more everyday yet still fascinating side of Egyptian perfumery: the common man. Perfume wasn't just a luxury enjoyed by the elite. It permeated every layer of Egyptian society, from the grand palaces of the pharaohs to the bustling marketplaces and quiet homes of ordinary Egyptians. While the finest fragrances may have been reserved for the royals, the art of perfumery had a much broader influence than we might first expect. Let's explore how the everyday Egyptian might have used perfume and the role scent played in daily life. First off, let's talk about personal hygiene. Now, in the modern world, We're used to showers, deodorants, and scented soaps. But in ancient Egypt, the idea of personal cleanliness was tied closely to the concept of spiritual purity. The Egyptians didn't have the same sanitary standards that we do today, but they were still obsessed with cleanliness in their own way. Instead of frequent baths, which weren't as common as you might think, Egyptians often relied on the application of oils and perfumed powders to cleanse themselves. In fact, bathing was less of a regular ritual and more of a luxury activity reserved for the rich. For the common Egyptian, scented oils and lotions were used as substitutes for modern hygiene products. They were a vital part of daily life, helping Egyptians maintain a sense of personal purity and freshness. Egyptians would use these oils on their skin to keep it moisturized, especially in the dry desert climate, and to mask the smell of daily life. After all, even in an ancient civilization, people still sweated, worked, and lived in environments where odor could be an issue. You might wonder, what kind of scents did everyday Egyptians use? Well, not surprisingly, they didn't have access to the rare and expensive ingredients that the royals used. Instead, commoners used what was available to them locally. Lotus flowers were a particularly important source of fragrance, with their sweet, subtle scent becoming emblematic of Egypt's lush environment. In fact, the lotus flower itself was symbolic of rebirth and eternity, making it the perfect fragrance for a people who were deeply focused on the afterlife and spiritual purity. Common Egyptians might have also used herbs and resins such as cedarwood, sandalwood, and myrrh, materials that were also used in mummification and had both spiritual and practical benefits. Herbal oils derived from plants like mint and coriander were also widely used, and these provided not just fragrance, but also medicinal benefits. Just as we use scented oils today for their soothing properties, the Egyptians saw fragrance as both a health remedy and a personal adornment. And let's not forget about the Egyptian marketplace, where perfumes and oils were big business. Vendors would sell a variety of oils, incense, and perfumes, often made with locally sourced ingredients. Scented oils were often sold in beautifully crafted clay jars or stone containers decorated with intricate carvings or painted images of gods and royalty. Buying these oils wasn't just about smelling nice, it was a status symbol. Even for the middle and lower classes, owning and wearing perfume was a marker of refinement and spirituality. A simple worker might not be able to afford a bottle of royal fragrance, but they could still participate in the culture of scent by wearing locally made oils. There was a distinct social hierarchy when it came to perfume. The more elaborate and rare your scent, the higher your social standing. While the working-class Egyptians might have worn simpler, locally sourced oils, the upper classes, including priests who wore fragrance during religious ceremonies, could afford oils from exotic ingredients. Imported goods like frankincense and myrrh were symbols of the upper class's ability to control trade and acquire rare materials. As a result, the fragrance you wore could convey much about your social rank, just as much as the clothes you wore or the food you ate. Now, it's important to remember that Egyptian society was also deeply focused on religion and the afterlife. Scent had an even deeper meaning here. When it came to personal use, it was believed that wearing perfume could protect the wearer from evil spirits and other negative forces. The act of wearing fragrance was therefore tied to spiritual safety. Ancient Egyptians believed that a sweet scent could ward off malevolent forces and help maintain spiritual balance in their daily lives. This belief in the protective power of scent can still be seen in some cultures today, where the burning of incense or the wearing of specific perfumes is thought to offer spiritual protection. Historians still debate the specific role of perfume in the lives of common Egyptians. Some argue that it was largely a luxury for the elite, with the poor relying more on simple oils or homemade remedies. Others suggest that perfume was so deeply embedded in Egyptian culture that even the lower classes would have considered it an essential part of daily life. Given the importance Egyptians placed on cleanliness, purity, and spirituality, it seems likely that even commoners would have used fragrance not just for pleasure, but as an integral part of their spiritual well-being. Perfume in ancient Egypt wasn't just about smelling nice. It was about communicating status, connecting to the divine, and maintaining spiritual purity. Whether you were a royal, a priest, or a common laborer, scent was a language you could use to express your place in the world. The next time you spray a little cologne or burn incense, just remember, it all goes back to the ancient Egyptians who believed that a good scent could transcend time and space, carrying with it messages to the gods and messages to the people around you. As we continue our journey through the world of ancient Egyptian perfumery, let's take a closer look at incense, an essential part of both daily life and religious practice in Egypt. While perfumes were used for personal adornment and spiritual protection, incense was an entirely different kind of olfactory experience, one deeply embedded in religious rituals. In fact, incense had such significance that it became a symbol of communication with the divine. The Egyptians believed that the act of burning incense created a bridge between the human world and the gods. It wasn't just about creating a pleasant atmosphere or masking unpleasant odors. It was about offering a sacred offering to the gods themselves. The Egyptians would burn incense during religious ceremonies, at temples, and even during daily rituals to honor their gods. Incense wasn't just an aromatic substance. It was a ritualistic tool, transforming the act of worship into a sensory experience. Tree. Frankincense, with its sweet, smoky scent, was considered the quintessential divine fragrance. It was burned during rituals to honor gods like Ra, the sun god, and Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood. The smoke from the burning resin was believed to carry prayers and offerings straight to the gods. The Egyptians believed that frankincense could purify the air, making it the perfect scent for creating a divine atmosphere in temples and sacred spaces. Alongside frankincense, another popular incense resin was myrrh. Myrrh, with its warm, balsamic aroma, was also used in religious rituals, particularly for funerary purposes. Myrrh was used during the mummification process to preserve the body and ward off decay, but it also played a role in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that myrrh's scent would guide the deceased soul safely into the afterlife, ensuring that it was protected and sanctified. Some scholars argue that incense, in general, symbolized the presence of the gods in Egyptian society. It was thought that when incense was burned, the gods themselves would be present in the space, offering divine protection and favor. Historians still debate whether incense had a purely spiritual purpose or if it also served more practical functions like purifying the air in the hot, stuffy temple spaces, while some suggest that incense was primarily about creating an atmosphere for worship. Others argue that the Egyptians used incense for medicinal purposes as well. In fact, aromatherapy, the idea that certain smells can heal and uplift, was practiced in ancient Egypt. Both frankincense and myrrh were believed to have healing properties, and their use in temples may have been as much about physical and emotional well-being as it was about pleasing the gods. Let's not forget about the role of incense in the royal court. The pharaohs didn't just burn incense for personal worship, they also used it as a tool to assert their power. During state ceremonies, incense was burned in enormous quantities, filling the air with a cloud of fragrance that would surround the pharaoh and his court. This created an environment that was as much about creating atmosphere as it was about symbolizing power. The ritualistic burning of incense served as a visual and olfactory signal that the pharaoh was in the presence of the gods, reinforcing his divine right to rule. Interestingly, The Egyptians also used incense for burial ceremonies. When a person died, their body was anointed with oils and resins, and incense was burned to guide the soul of the deceased to the afterlife. In tombs, incense burners were often placed near the body of the deceased, offering a perpetual connection to the divine. The smoke from the incense was thought to carry the soul of the deceased to the gods, ensuring that they were properly received and protected. And let's not overlook the role of incense in everyday Egyptian life. While burning incense was most common in religious contexts, it wasn't confined only to temples. Incense was also burned in the home, especially during festivals or important family events. It was believed to cleanse the space, making it a sacred place for family gatherings and personal reflection. Even commoners could purchase incense, making it an accessible way for people to invite divine favor into their homes. Historians still debate the sociological importance of incense. Was it just for the elite, or did it transcend social classes to become an integral part of Egyptian life? Some scholars believe that incense was a unifying cultural symbol, a ritualistic substance that everyone, regardless of status, could relate to and participate in. Whether you were a royal or a commoner, burning incense was a way to participate in a shared cultural experience, one that connected you to your gods and to the collective spiritual well-being of the nation. As we look at the role of incense in ancient Egypt, we start to see how deeply connected scent was to the Egyptians' view of the world. Fragrance wasn't just something to wear or burn for enjoyment. It was a key element in the spiritual landscape of Egyptian society. Incense, perfumes, and oils all played a role in bridging the gap between the human and divine, making scent not only a sensory experience but a spiritual necessity. Today, when we burn incense or wear perfumes, we might not always think about the spiritual history behind them. But for the ancient Egyptians, scent was more than just a luxury. It was a direct link to the gods, to the afterlife, and to the eternal. As we continue our journey through the fragrant world of ancient Egypt, we now turn our focus to the fascinating intersection of perfume and medicine. In today's world, we often think of perfume as a form of personal adornment or a way to create a pleasant atmosphere. But in ancient Egypt, perfume wasn't just for pleasure. It had a functional role in medicine and health. Egyptians, with their deep connection to the natural world, understood the healing properties of fragrance, and they used it in a variety of ways to treat ailments and maintain wellness. One of the most common uses of perfume in Egyptian medicine was as an antiseptic. Myrrh, one of the primary resins used in perfumes, was highly valued for its antibacterial properties. The ancient Egyptians used myrrh to treat wounds, reduce infections, and even treat respiratory issues. It was considered a sacred substance, and its use in both religious rituals and medical treatments was not just a coincidence. Myrrh's powerful scent was thought to carry divine blessings, which added a layer of spiritual significance to its use. Similarly, frankincense was another commonly used resin in Egyptian medicine. Frankincense was used to treat a wide range of issues, from inflammation to digestive problems. In fact, it was often burned in temples, not only for its spiritual significance, but also for its therapeutic effects on the people who breathed in its smoke. Frankincense was thought to cleanse the body and mind, creating a sense of well-being and spiritual clarity. The Egyptians believed that aromatherapy, in its most basic form, was an essential aspect of personal health. But it wasn't just resins that the Egyptians used for medicinal purposes. Many of the flower-based perfumes were used for their soothing properties. For instance, lotus, which had strong spiritual significance in Egypt, was also used to promote relaxation and reduce stress. The scent of the lotus was thought to calm the mind and bring clarity, making it an important part of Egyptian mental health practices. Whether it was worn as perfume or used in incense, the lotus was regarded as a divine flower, and its scent was believed to open the mind to deeper spiritual understanding. Historians still debate the extent to which the Egyptians used fragrance as a true medical treatment, or whether it was more symbolic. Some scholars argue that many of the ancient treatments were based on ritual and spiritual belief rather than modern medical principles. Others suggest that the Egyptians were among the earliest practitioners of holistic health, using a combination of scents, herbs, and rituals to maintain physical, mental, and spiritual health. Either way, it's clear that the Egyptians believed that scent had a profound impact on the body and the soul. Another interesting aspect of Egyptian medicine was the use of perfumes in mummification. As we've already discussed, embalming the dead was a deeply sacred act in Egypt, and perfume played an integral role in this process. The ancient Egyptians used oils and resins to preserve the body, ensuring that the physical remains of the deceased would be protected for the afterlife. But more than just preservation, these scented substances were believed to have spiritual power. The scent of myrrh, for example, was thought to keep evil spirits at bay and ensure that the soul of the deceased would have a safe passage to the afterlife. In this context, perfume wasn't just a way to keep the body smelling pleasant. It was a divine substance that helped protect the soul. The very act of perfuming the body with resins and oils was seen as a way to connect the deceased with the gods and ensure that they would find peace in the afterlife. It's fascinating to think that something as simple as scent could hold such profound spiritual power in the Egyptian worldview. But let's not overlook the more practical side of Egyptian medicine and fragrance. In a time when many medical treatments were based on trial and error, the Egyptians used perfume and scented oils as a preventive measure. If a person was feeling mentally or physically unwell, they might apply a fragrance that would help to uplift their spirits or calm their nerves. The Egyptians believed in maintaining a balance between the body, mind, and spirit, and fragrance was seen as a tool to help achieve that equilibrium. For example, if a person was suffering from anxiety or stress, they might use lotus oil to calm their nerves and bring a sense of peace. Similarly, frankincense was used for its soothing and anti-inflammatory properties. The Egyptians understood that emotional and spiritual well-being were just as important as physical health, and fragrance played a key role in maintaining that delicate balance. As we continue to study the medical practices of ancient Egypt, we are still discovering how advanced their understanding of holistic health truly was. While many of their treatments were based on beliefs and rituals, they were also deeply connected to the natural world and the healing properties of plants, oils, and resins. In this sense, the Egyptians were ahead of their time, blending spirituality with the physical world in ways that modern medicine is only now beginning to explore. So, while we may not be using frankincense and myrrh to treat our colds or injuries today, it's important to remember that the ancient Egyptians were among the first to understand that scent wasn't just something to enjoy, it was something that could heal, protect, and connect the living with the divine. And in a world that constantly seeks new ways to improve mental health and well-being, maybe we could learn a thing or two from the ancient Egyptians about the profound power of fragrance. Having explored how perfume intersected with religion, royalty, and medicine, we now turn our attention to the ancient perfume industry itself. Perfume was not only a personal luxury in ancient Egypt, it was also an industry that spanned a wide range of professions, from artisans to traders. While we often think of perfume making as a rarefied art reserved for the elite, it was in fact an essential part of Egypt's economic and cultural life. Let's take a closer look at how this scented industry functioned in the ancient world. At the heart of the Egyptian perfume industry were the perfume makers, or perfumers, who were highly regarded for their skills in blending natural oils and resins into potent, divine fragrances. While perfume was often associated with royalty and religious ceremonies, the reality is that perfume making was a bustling business in Egypt. In bustling markets, people could purchase a range of scents from simple floral oils to complex sacred blends. Perfumers had a mastery of chemistry, not in the scientific sense, but in the sense that they understood how to manipulate ingredients like flowers, herbs, and resins to produce specific effects on the senses. The role of the perfumer was not just about creating fragrances for personal use. Perfumers were also integral to religious rituals, funerary practices, and even medicinal treatments. In this way, perfume makers were seen as artists, healers, and spiritual guides performing a job that was much more than just crafting a pleasant scent. Their work had deep connections to both the material and spiritual worlds. A key element in the perfume trade was the raw materials used to create these intoxicating scents. Egypt had a natural abundance of ingredients for perfume making, especially along the banks of the Nile River. But they also imported rare and exotic substances from as far away as the Arabian Peninsula and East Africa. This access to foreign trade routes made Egypt a key player in the global perfume trade, which flourished for centuries. One of the most valuable raw materials in the Egyptian perfume industry was frankincense. Frankincense trees, which grew in the dry, arid regions of the Arabian Peninsula, produced the resin that was burned as incense and used in the creation of perfumes. Egyptian traders would go on long journeys to acquire frankincense, often bringing back large quantities for use in temples, funerary rites, and royal ceremonies. The Egyptians also imported myrrh, which was even more valuable than frankincense due to its preservative qualities and its use in embalming. In addition to these highly prized imports, Egypt had access to a wide variety of local flowers and plants that provided rich, sweet, and exotic fragrances. Lotus flowers, geraniums, roses, and jasmine were commonly used in Egyptian perfumes. These flowers were harvested locally and distilled or macerated into oils that could then be used as personal fragrances, ritual offerings, or medicinal treatments. The very act of harvesting these materials often involved ritual significance, as the process was thought to carry a sense of divine blessing. Another way perfume making linked the earthly to the divine. The Egyptians also utilized resins from cedarwood, cypress, and pine for their perfumes. These woods were particularly important because they were believed to carry with them the qualities of immortality and strength, traits that the Egyptians associated with their gods and their pharaohs. Cedarwood, in particular, was seen as a symbol of durability, and using it in perfume was thought to align the wearer with these powerful, eternal qualities. Once the raw materials were gathered, they were taken to workshops often located near temples or in bustling market districts, where perfumers would begin their work. These workshops were more than simple laboratories. They were places where art and science blended together to create complex divine scents. Clay pots and stone jars were used to store oils and perfumes, many of which were carefully sealed to preserve their freshness. The process was labor-intensive and required not only an understanding of how scents interacted, but also a deep cultural knowledge of the ingredients and their symbolic meanings. While the artisan perfumers worked their magic in these workshops, a secondary but equally important aspect of the perfume trade was distribution. Once the perfumes were crafted, they needed to be sold. Markets in cities like Thebes and Memphis were teeming with vendors hawking fragrant oils and resins, and perfumes would be bought not only by royalty but also by ordinary Egyptians. Traders would import the rarest ingredients and sell them to both local Egyptians and foreign dignitaries, creating a thriving perfume industry that spanned the entire ancient world. Historians still debate the scale of the perfume trade. Did it extend far beyond Egypt's borders, influencing perfume making in other ancient cultures? Or was Egypt the central hub for all perfume production? Some scholars argue that Egypt's perfume trade was not as expansive as we like to believe, while others suggest that it set the tone for much of the perfume making that would later flourish in Greece and Rome. Regardless, the Egyptian perfume industry was undeniably rich and vibrant, producing some of the finest scents the world had ever known. The prestige of owning Egyptian perfume, whether as a king, queen, priest, or commoner, was undeniable. Perfumes became symbols of wealth, spirituality, and social status in a way that would influence fragrance culture for centuries to come. What's most fascinating about the Egyptian perfume industry is how interwoven it was with every aspect of life in the ancient world. Whether it was about pleasure, spirituality, health, or wealth, perfume in Egypt was far more than a simple indulgence. It was a way of expressing and maintaining a connection with the gods, with the afterlife, and with the world around them. And, in this sense, perfume wasn't just something that smelled good, it was woven into the fabric of Egyptian civilization, creating an industry that would leave an indelible mark on history. As we delve even deeper into the enchanting world of ancient Egyptian perfumery, let's now turn our attention to a very interesting aspect of Egyptian society, the Olympian scent landscape, the profound impact that scent had not just on daily life, but on the larger cultural mindset of the Egyptians. From the gods they worshipped to the rituals they performed, fragrance permeated every corner of Egyptian life. So, what did the ancient Egyptians actually smell like? What was the olfactory landscape of Egypt? And how did these scents shape the way Egyptians perceived their world? We've already discussed the various ingredients used in perfumes and incense, but the Egyptian approach to scent was more than just about creating pleasing aromas. Scent was a powerful medium through which they understood and engaged with the unseen world, the gods, the afterlife, and the forces that governed their lives. Imagine this. As you walk through a bustling Egyptian marketplace, the air is filled with a variety of smells, from the earthy, rich aroma of myrrh and frankincense to the sweet floral fragrance of lotus and geraniums. The smell of incense would drift from the temples and sacred spaces, filling the air with a sacred perfume that invited the gods to descend and bless the earth. But it wasn't just religious settings that had strong, characteristic scents. The home also had its own unique atmosphere, influenced by the fragrances used in daily life. Historians still debate whether Egyptians were more aware of scent than modern societies. Did the Egyptians view their world through an intensely olfactory lens? Were fragrances as important to their social interactions and cultural identity as we might think? Some suggest that the Egyptians used scents as a form of spiritual communication to connect with divine powers and influence their destiny. Others believe that scent was simply part of a larger sensory culture that embraced all aspects of life: sight, sound, touch, and, of course, smell. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian culture is how the ancient Egyptians thought about memory and emotion in relation to scent. The power of fragrance to evoke memories is not a new concept, but the Egyptians seem to have a particularly strong belief in the emotional resonance of scent. Perfume wasn't just a tool for self-expression. It was thought to have the ability to influence one's mood and state of mind. Certain fragrances like lotus and frankincense were used not just in rituals, but also for mental clarity and emotional stability. It's almost as though they intuitively understood what modern aromatherapy practitioners have since confirmed, that scent has a psychological power that can help alter one's emotional state. In religious contexts, certain sacred oils were used to stimulate the senses, to help focus the mind during prayers, and to help the priest or worshiper connect with the gods. The strong, smoky scent of frankincense, in particular, was used to create an atmosphere conducive to meditation, helping individuals to focus their thoughts and enter a spiritual state. Many scholars suggest that the Egyptians believed the act of smelling sacred incense could heighten spiritual awareness and facilitate communication with the divine. Yet, the divine connection wasn't limited to religious rituals alone. The Egyptians had a particular reverence for smells associated with royalty. The very idea of royal fragrance was so strong that the Egyptians believed a pharaoh's scent carried divine power. Pharaohs would often have their own unique perfumes created by master perfumers that would symbolize their connection to the gods. In fact, the royal scent was considered so important that it was a key part of their public image, much like a royal portrait or a crown. Let's not forget the importance of fragrance in the afterlife, where scents took on an even more ritualistic and spiritual significance. For Egyptians, the journey to the afterlife was a passage through various spiritual realms, and the use of perfumes was meant to ensure that the soul could travel safely, protected by the divine and guided by the gods. This belief in the afterlife as an olfactory journey is unique. While we often think of the afterlife in terms of light, peace, or darkness for the Egyptians, it was also about the scent of perfumed oils and incense that would follow the soul as it passed through the realms. In this spiritual framework, perfume and incense weren't just tools of earthly luxury. They were sacred tools of immortality. When Egyptians entered the tombs of their loved ones, they would often leave offerings of perfumes and oils, knowing that these scented gifts would accompany the deceased into the next world. The tomb of a pharaoh would be filled with burning incense and bottles of perfume, ensuring that the king or queen was properly prepared to meet the gods in the afterlife. Historians still argue about the true meaning of scent in the Egyptian afterlife. Some suggest that perfumes were simply aesthetic enhancements meant to honor the deceased, while others argue that they were spiritual necessities, helping to purify and protect the soul. Regardless of the debate, one thing is clear: scent was an essential part of the spiritual fabric of Egyptian life. Whether it was used to honor the gods, to ensure the safety of the deceased, or to create a sacred atmosphere during worship, fragrance was integral to Egypt's understanding of life, death, and everything in between. So, the next time you catch a familiar scent that brings back a memory or lifts your mood, remember that the ancient Egyptians had a similar experience. Their world was filled with scent, and they shaped their lives and their beliefs around it in ways we're still unraveling today. As we venture deeper into the legacy of ancient Egyptian perfume making, it's time to explore something that may not be immediately obvious: the influence of Egyptian perfumery on the wider world. While much of Egypt's perfume trade was restricted to the elite, the profound impact of their scent culture rippled outward, influencing surrounding cultures and eventually spreading through the Mediterranean and beyond. As Egypt's perfume trade flourished, it became a vital element of their cultural export, influencing the perfume-making traditions of Greece, Rome, and even regions farther afield. The Egyptians didn't just keep their perfume-making secrets locked within their borders. They shared their knowledge through trade routes and diplomatic exchanges. The aromatic resins and essential oils that Egypt produced were highly coveted commodities. Frankincense and myrrh, for example, were prized by cultures all over the Mediterranean, including Greece, Rome, and Persia. These materials, which the Egyptians expertly harvested and processed, became central to the perfume trade in these regions. But beyond simply being raw materials, the Egyptian understanding of scent making became a source of inspiration for perfumers in the ancient world. The Greeks, who were known for their refined tastes in luxury, were particularly taken with Egyptian perfumes. Historical texts suggest that Greek philosophers and writers such as Plato and Theophrastus admired the Egyptians for their mastery of perfumery. Alexander the Great, who spent time in Egypt, brought back many aspects of Egyptian culture, including their perfume-making techniques. The Greeks not only adopted Egyptian fragrance methods, but they also started experimenting with different ingredients and approaches to perfume, integrating their own innovations. Perhaps the most notable cultural exchange came when the Greeks began to develop their own styles of scented oils and ointments. The ancient Greeks, especially under the rule of Alexander the Great, took Egyptian knowledge of scent-making to new heights. They began using oils and perfumes not just for religious ceremonies, but also as part of their daily routines. They would anoint their bodies with scented oils to protect the skin and to create a sense of personal luxury. The use of perfumes in Greek social life grew exponentially, and they adapted the methods they learned from the Egyptians to suit their tastes, creating complex and multi-layered fragrances that would eventually influence the Romans. Historians still debate how much the Greeks truly understood about Egyptian perfumery. Some scholars believe the Greeks just borrowed the Egyptians' recipes, while others argue that Greek perfumers revolutionized the craft by adding their own philosophical approach to scent, focusing more on how fragrances interacted with the human body and mind. Regardless of the specifics, one thing is clear: Egyptian perfumery had a profound influence on Greek and Roman perfumery, serving as the foundation upon which the modern perfume industry was built. When the Romans came into power, they took the art of perfume making even further, refining the process and making perfume an essential part of everyday life. Roman elite, much like the Egyptians, relied heavily on perfume not only for personal adornment, but also as a tool to demonstrate power and status. The Romans expanded on the Egyptian practice of burning incense for religious rituals, making it a cultural and spiritual staple across the empire. Like the Egyptians, Romans believed that the act of burning incense had the power to connect them to the gods, creating an atmosphere that invited divine favor. However, Romans also introduced the use of perfumed water and fragranced oils for personal use, in a way that made scent an integral part of daily living, not just reserved for special occasions or religious ceremonies. The use of perfume in the Roman world also spurred a growing demand for luxury goods. Scented oils and ointments were often traded as prestige items between cultures, and the perfume-making industry expanded throughout the Mediterranean. The Romans, too, started importing Egyptian perfume products and ingredients in large quantities, and Egypt's influence on Roman scent traditions cannot be overstated. Cleopatra's legacy, in particular, continued to shape Roman culture long after her reign ended. Roman elites would often commission perfumed oils and fragrances from Egypt, perpetuating the link between Egyptian luxury and Roman high society. But Egypt's perfume influence didn't stop there. Arabian traders also learned from the Egyptians and, in turn, spread their knowledge of fragrance far into Asia. As trade routes extended across the Middle East and into India, Egyptian-inspired perfume techniques found their way into the ancient world's spice routes. Indian and Persian perfume traditions grew, blending the elements of Egyptian scent-making with their own local aromatic herbs and oils. This melding of cultures created rich and unique fragrance traditions that have carried through into modern perfumery. Today, Egyptian-inspired perfumes are still highly regarded, and many of the ingredients used by the ancient Egyptians are still prized by modern perfumers. The scents of frankincense, myrrh, lotus, and cedar continue to dominate the perfume industry, especially in luxury and spiritual products. While modern perfumery has evolved and diversified in countless ways, it's clear that the foundations of this industry rest in the knowledge passed down from the ancient Egyptians. Historians still argue about how much Egyptian influence shaped the evolution of Western perfume. Did Egypt truly lay the foundation for the global perfume industry? Or was it just one of many cultural threads that contributed to the complex tapestry of fragrance history? Some scholars suggest that Egypt's role was indispensable, while others claim that the Egyptians' methods were just one aspect of the larger cross-cultural exchange that occurred through the ancient world. However, there is no denying that Egypt's legacy in scent-making continues to influence and inspire us today. The perfumes of ancient Egypt may have been used for religious rituals and royal indulgence, but they eventually blossomed into a global trade that shaped cultures across the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and beyond. From the royal courts of Egypt to the ancient streets of Rome, fragrance has always been a symbol of luxury, power, and spiritual connection. The Egyptians set the stage, and the legacy of their perfumes has echoed throughout history, inspiring the art of scent-making for millennia. As we draw closer to the final chapters of our journey through ancient Egyptian perfumery, it's time to reflect on how modern science is piecing together the ancient puzzle of fragrance creation. While the Egyptians were masters of the art of perfumery, much of their techniques and recipes were lost to time. However, the legacy of their craft has sparked a modern revival through scientific discovery, archaeology, and the dedication of researchers who are recreating the scents that once filled the air of the ancient Nile. One of the most exciting areas of research has been the chemical analysis of ancient Egyptian perfumes. Thanks to advances in modern technology, scientists have been able to examine residue left behind in ancient perfume bottles and mummified tombs. These studies have revealed traces of essential oils, resins, and other fragrant compounds that the ancient Egyptians used in their creations. For example, in 2003, researchers uncovered a perfume jar in the tomb of Queen Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most famous female pharaohs. The jar, sealed for over 3,000 years, still contained traces of fragrant substances. Researchers were able to identify the presence of frankincense, myrrh, and other resins. This discovery provided vital clues into the scents that the ancient Egyptians favored and helped modern perfumers understand the types of materials used. In fact, the process of recreating these ancient perfumes has become a thriving area of interest. Thanks to discoveries like this, some perfume houses and archaeologists have started to experiment with recreating the fragrances worn by Cleopatra, Tutankhamun, and others. Using ancient recipes as a basis and mixing them with modern techniques and materials, they've been able to craft perfumes that mimic the scents of ancient Egypt. These revived perfumes offer us a fascinating sensory connection to the past, a way to experience history through our noses. One notable example is the perfume company Callis, which specializes in recreating scents from the ancient world. They've collaborated with researchers and archaeologists to reproduce frankincense and myrrh perfumes exactly as the Egyptians might have worn them. The idea is to reintroduce authentic ancient scents into modern life, allowing people today to experience a tiny piece of history through the most visceral sense, smell. However, while we've been able to recreate scents, there is still a lot we don't know about the exact methods the Egyptians used. For instance, we have a general idea of the ingredients used in their perfumes, but the precise recipes and techniques for blending them are still somewhat mysterious. Ancient Egyptian perfumers worked with local plants like lotus and geraniums, but they also used imported ingredients like frankincense and myrrh that were often brought in from trade routes stretching from Arabia, Africa, and the Mediterranean. How they balanced these ingredients and created the complex, multi-layered perfumes they were known for remains a question for modern scholars and perfumers alike. Moreover, historians and chemists continue to debate how much chemical knowledge the Egyptians had. Did they understand the alchemy of perfume making, or were their methods more trial and error? Ancient Egyptian texts like the Ebers Papyrus contain some of the earliest known recipes for perfumes and other scented products. However, these recipes are often vague and do not include the specific quantities of ingredients, leaving researchers to guess at the ratios used. Some experts believe the Egyptians were more intuitive in their blending, relying on their senses and experience rather than precise measurements. Modern scholars still argue over the chemistry of scent in ancient Egypt. Some believe the Egyptians had an advanced understanding of how different scents could influence emotions or spiritual states, while others believe the process was far more rudimentary. Regardless, the enduring legacy of Egyptian perfumery is undeniable. What we do know is that their mastery of scent helped shape the perfume industry we know today, influencing cultures across the Mediterranean and leaving an indelible mark on history. It's also interesting to note that the use of perfume and incense in Egyptian society was ritualistic. While today we often use perfumes to smell good or feel luxurious, the Egyptians had a profound spiritual relationship with scent. It wasn't just about adorning the body, it was about using fragrance as a form of communication with the divine. The Egyptians used incense to carry their prayers and offerings to the gods. By burning these sacred substances, they believed they were elevating their spirits to a higher plane and inviting the gods to join them in the temple. Today, this tradition lives on in spiritual practices around the world, where incense is still burned to purify the air and invite divine energy into sacred spaces. When you burn a stick of incense today, it's not hard to imagine how the ancient Egyptians might have felt, enveloped in the smoke of sacred scents. Perhaps they, too, felt a sense of calm or connection to something greater as the smoke spiraled upward, carrying their prayers and intentions with it. The burning of incense, the wearing of fragrant oils, and the creation of sacred perfumes were more than just cultural traditions. They were a spiritual practice that tied the Egyptians to the gods and to the afterlife. As we conclude this section, it's worth noting the broader influence of Egyptian perfumery on our modern-day relationship with fragrance. Whether it's the burning of incense in temples, the creation of luxurious perfumes for personal adornment, or the use of fragrances for spiritual and therapeutic purposes, the Egyptian legacy is alive and well today. The ancient art of perfumery has evolved, yes, but its roots are firmly planted in the rituals and practices of ancient Egypt. The Egyptians didn't just create perfumes, they created a worldview centered around the powerful mystical properties of scent, a worldview that continues to shape how we experience and understand fragrance today. We've now explored the ways in which ancient Egyptian perfumery impacted everything from royalty to religion to medicine, and how their knowledge eventually influenced the entire Mediterranean world. But let's take a moment to step back and ask a bigger question. What was the cultural significance of perfume in Egyptian society? Why did they place such importance on something as seemingly simple as scent? Was it just about status? Or did it serve deeper, more symbolic purposes that tied into the very fabric of Egyptian culture? To begin answering this question, it's crucial to understand the Egyptian worldview, which was fundamentally spiritual. The Egyptians believed that everything, whether it was the earth, the gods, or the afterlife, was connected through a subtle network of divine energy. Perfume was just one of many ways they interacted with this energy. The Egyptians saw the scent of a perfume not as a mere fragrance, but as a vehicle of divine essence, something that could elevate their consciousness and facilitate spiritual communication. When Egyptians burned incense or anointed themselves with oils, they weren't simply indulging in luxury. They were engaging in an act that had cosmic significance. The very scent of the perfume was thought to carry prayers and intentions to the gods. This idea was not only about honoring the gods, it was about participating in the cosmic order, a fundamental concept in Egyptian culture. The ancient Egyptians believed that the gods were present in everything, and scent, as a powerful sensory experience, became a bridge between the material world and the divine. Moreover, fragrance played a central role in Egyptian rituals surrounding life and death. From birth to burial, perfume was used to mark key moments in the human experience, ensuring that individuals were connected to the divine at every stage of their existence. The use of perfumes during mummification, for example, wasn't just about keeping the body intact for eternity. It was about ensuring the soul's safe journey to the afterlife. Fragrance was seen as a protective force, one that guided the deceased through the spiritual realms and offered them protection from malevolent forces. Perfume also had a deep emotional significance for the Egyptians. The power of scent to influence emotions is something we still recognize today, but the Egyptians took it even further by believing that certain perfumes could affect the soul. For instance, a powerful scent like myrrh or frankincense was associated with strength and protection, while lighter, sweeter scents like lotus were thought to encourage peace and spiritual awakening. In this sense, perfume was more than just an external adornment. It was a tool for shaping one's inner life, aligning the body, mind, and spirit with the forces of the divine. When you consider this holistic role of perfume in Egyptian life, it's clear that scent wasn't just an aesthetic choice. It was an essential part of the Egyptian spiritual toolkit. The act of wearing fragrance, burning incense, and making offerings wasn't about simply smelling good. It was about ensuring that the individual was in harmony with the universe. Perfume was an active participant in this spiritual dance, helping to maintain the cosmic balance between gods, humans, and nature. One of the key aspects of Egyptian culture that is reflected in their use of perfume is the importance they placed on immortality. Perfume, in many ways, became a symbol of eternal life. Just as the soul was believed to live on forever, so too were the sacred scents that were used in the burial of the dead. The fragrances of frankincense, myrrh, and lotus were thought to help the deceased transition to the afterlife, where they would live for eternity in the presence of the gods. In this way, perfume was not just something for the living, it was a tool for immortality, for continuing one's connection with the divine even after death. Historians still debate the symbolic significance of fragrance in ancient Egypt. Some argue that perfume was purely a luxury item, a sign of wealth and status. Others believe that its significance went much deeper, that perfume was a divine tool with the power to transcend time and space, helping humans communicate with the gods and maintain a balance between the material and spiritual worlds. Still, some believe that the use of scent was part of a larger ritualistic system, that everything from the use of colors and symbols to smells and sounds played a role in the Egyptian search for cosmic order and spiritual enlightenment. Whether perfume was used to connect with the gods, protect the soul, or simply mark the important moments of life, it was an integral part of Egyptian culture. The ancient Egyptians saw fragrance as more than just an aroma. It was a living force, something that could shape the world around them, influence their emotional and spiritual states, and guide them through the mysteries of life and death. Today, we can still feel the resonance of this ancient understanding of scent. When we use perfume, incense, or even essential oils, we're participating in a practice that dates back thousands of years. We may no longer believe that scent can directly connect us with the gods or the afterlife, but we still use fragrance to communicate something profound about ourselves, our moods, our identities, our spiritual practices. The Egyptians understood that scent wasn't just about luxury or fashion, it was about a deep, spiritual connection to the universe. And in a world that often feels disconnected, perhaps we could all take a moment to remember that ancient wisdom, that a simple fragrance can create a connection, shift our emotions, and remind us that we are part of something much larger than ourselves. Now that we've delved deeply into the intricacies of perfume's spiritual, medicinal, and cultural roles in ancient Egyptian society, it's time to consider how all this knowledge still influences us today. The ancient Egyptians may have passed on, but their legacy in perfumery continues to ripple through time, not just in the perfumes we wear, but in the very art of fragrance creation. Many of the techniques they pioneered, the ingredients they used, and even their philosophy surrounding scent still shape the perfume industry we know today. If you've ever stepped into a luxury perfume shop, or even spritzed a bottle of your favorite fragrance, you might not immediately think of ancient Egypt, but the reality is that much of modern perfumery owes its origins to the early Egyptian methods. While the perfume industry has certainly evolved since then, thanks to advances in chemistry, technology, and a greater global exchange of ideas, the fundamentals of Egyptian perfumery still guide our understanding of fragrance. For starters, the Egyptians were among the first to create a wide array of essential oils, extracting fragrances from flowers, resins, and herbs. This process of extraction, though more sophisticated today, is still at the heart of perfume making. The method of distillation was introduced in ancient Egypt and allowed them to extract essential oils from plants and resins like myrrh, frankincense, and lotus. While distillation has been refined over the millennia, the concept of isolating pure scent compounds remains the core principle of how modern perfumes are made. This technique, used to capture the essence of a plant or resin and preserve it in its most potent form, is something perfumers today rely on daily, making the Egyptians early innovators of what would become a multi-billion-dollar industry. The use of frankincense and myrrh, both crucial to Egyptian perfume making, continues to be revered today. These timeless resins are still in use in high-end perfumes, often as base notes in blends. Their presence evokes a sense of history, spirituality, and luxury that modern consumers have come to associate with exquisite perfumes. While the use of myrrh and frankincense today is more about sophisticated aromatics, they still carry the same rich cultural and spiritual associations they had in ancient times. The ancient Egyptians used them as offerings to the gods, believing their scents could bring them closer to the divine, and modern perfumers still use them for their complex, multi-layered fragrances. But the influence of Egyptian perfume making goes beyond just the raw materials and methods. The Egyptians understood scent as powerful communication, not just a physical sensation, but a means of conveying something deep, something symbolic. Their perfumes didn't just smell nice, they had a purpose. Whether for religious rituals, medicinal use, or as a means to project authority, perfume was tied to spiritual and cultural significance. Modern perfumers still work with these same ideas. Fragrance isn't just about creating something that smells good, it's about creating something that evokes emotion, memory, and identity. When you spritz your favorite perfume, you might not be intending to summon the gods, but the power of scent to influence emotion is universal. Fragrance today is embedded in the luxury market, used to convey sophistication, sensuality, or even nostalgia. Brands still craft fragrances to communicate status, just as Egyptian royalty used scent to assert their divine authority. When the Egyptians anointed themselves with sacred oils, they weren't just masking their scent, they were using fragrance as a way to project divine power, a concept still employed in the marketing of luxury perfumes today. The idea that scent can change perceptions, alter moods, or even create memories has been carried forward into our current understanding of fragrance. One of the most enduring aspects of Egyptian perfumery is the ritualistic aspect, the belief that scent is a spiritual connector. In Egypt, the act of burning incense in temples or wearing perfume wasn't simply a daily indulgence. It was a deeply spiritual act that connected the physical world with the divine. Today, while we may not burn incense to communicate with gods, many cultures still incorporate scent into spiritual practices. Incense continues to be used in temples, churches, and meditation spaces around the world, reinforcing that fragrance still plays a role in spiritual rituals today. Additionally, the concept of holistic health and well-being is one that the Egyptians were pioneers in. The use of fragrances for health, particularly for their ability to influence emotions, clear the mind, and heal the body, is something we are still rediscovering today in the field of aromatherapy. The Egyptians used essential oils like frankincense and myrrh for medicinal purposes, believing they had the power to heal the body and spirit. Modern aromatherapy continues this tradition, recognizing that scent can affect mood, mental clarity, and even physical ailments. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of interest in natural perfumes, and with that, a return to many of the plant-based ingredients the Egyptians used: lotus, myrrh, frankincense, and cedarwood. As modern consumers become more conscious of the ingredients in their products, they are turning back to ancient wisdom and seeking out perfumes made with natural, sustainable ingredients. Perfume houses that specialize in artisan, handmade perfumes often draw on these ancient ingredients and methods, blending them with modern techniques to create fragrances that are both timeless and contemporary. Finally, let's not forget that perfume as a form of luxury and indulgence continues to play a central role in today's global culture. The Egyptians created something that transcended time. Perfume wasn't just a physical product, it was a cultural phenomenon, a way to connect with the divine, with nature, and with one's own inner self. The art of perfume making wasn't merely about creating something pleasant. It was about creating an experience, a story, and a connection, principles that remain at the heart of modern perfumery. In closing, the story of Egyptian perfumery is a tale of both innovation and continuity. The Egyptians weren't just creating perfumes for the sake of scent, they were crafting a spiritual experience, a divine connection, and a cultural legacy that continues to shape the world of fragrance today. The enduring power of their scents, whether in the form of myrrh, frankincense, or lotus, reminds us of the deep, symbolic nature of perfume and its ability to transcend time, place, and culture. As we come to the final leg of our journey through the fascinating world of ancient Egyptian perfumery, it's time to reflect on the lasting legacy of this ancient craft and how it continues to captivate the world today. We've seen how the Egyptians mastered the art of perfume making, how they blended spiritual, medicinal, and cultural elements into their fragrances, and how their techniques laid the foundation for the global perfume industry that flourishes today. But beyond the technical aspects, let's take a moment to appreciate the deeper significance of perfume in Egyptian society, as well as its enduring power in modern times. At the heart of everything was connection, the connection between the human and the divine, the mortal and the eternal. In Egypt, scent was not merely a physical sensation, it was a bridge to the gods, a sacred medium that carried prayers, offerings, and intentions across the veil between the worlds. Whether it was the smoke of incense rising toward the heavens or the perfumed oils anointed on the body, the Egyptians understood that fragrance could elevate the mundane to the sacred. Perfume in ancient Egypt was a language spoken by the gods themselves. The lotus perfume, for example, was not just a scent, it was a symbol of rebirth and eternity, reflecting the cycle of life, death, and resurrection that permeated Egyptian beliefs. The Egyptians used fragrance to communicate with the gods, to secure favor from the divine, and to ensure that their souls would pass smoothly into the afterlife. Even the pharaohs, the living gods of Egypt, used perfumes as a way to reinforce their divine authority and to communicate their connection to the cosmic order. Their scent was a manifestation of their power, both earthly and divine. Fast forward to today, and while we may not use incense to summon gods or perfumed oils for mummification, the cultural significance of fragrance is still as powerful as ever. Modern perfumery, like its Egyptian predecessor, is deeply tied to identity and status. The perfumes we wear still carry with them messages, whether we realize it or not, about who we are, how we wish to be perceived, and the image we project into the world. The choice of fragrance is still a form of self-expression, a personal narrative that communicates something deeper than just scent. It's a language we all speak, whether consciously or not. Moreover, the symbolism of perfume as a spiritual tool has transcended time. While the ancient Egyptians used scent to connect with their gods, we too use fragrances to connect with ourselves and the world around us. Aromatherapy, for instance, is a modern-day manifestation of the same belief that certain scents can influence our mood, emotions, and even our health. Just as the Egyptians believed frankincense could calm the spirit and myrrh could heal the body, today's essential oils are still seen as powerful tools for achieving emotional balance and well-being. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of Egyptian perfumery is its timeless nature. The perfumes created by the Egyptians were not just luxury items, they were sacred objects, carrying with them the essence of life itself. The scents they used, myrrh, frankincense, lotus, cedarwood, continue to be some of the most revered ingredients in modern perfumery. These ancient fragrances have survived millennia, passing through time to become the foundation of modern scent-making. They connect us to the past, offering us a sensory link to a civilization that understood, perhaps, better than most, the spiritual power of scent. As we reflect on this legacy, we also see how the story of Egyptian perfumery mirrors the story of human connection through the ages. From the pharaohs to the commoners, from the sacred rituals to the everyday experiences, fragrance was a tool of connection, a way to link the self with the divine, the present with the past, and the mortal with the eternal. It was an art form that transcended the physical realm, reaching into the spiritual, where scent became a form of communication, healing, and immortality. In this sense, Egyptian perfumery wasn't just about creating something that smelled good, it was about creating something that carried meaning, purpose, and spiritual significance. The Egyptians understood that scent had the power to influence the soul, to heal the body, and to connect the individual to something greater than themselves. And while the world has changed since the days of Cleopatra and the pharaohs, the spiritual power of fragrance remains as potent as ever. As we close this chapter on ancient Egyptian perfumery, it's clear that the legacy of this craft is far from over. The perfumes that once graced the temples and tombs of Egypt still shape our lives today, influencing how we view ourselves, our world, and our connection to the divine. The Egyptians didn't just create perfumes, they created a legacy of scent, a legacy that still resonates in every bottle of fragrance we wear, every incense stick we burn, and every aromatic oil we apply. The world may have moved on from the days of mummification and incense-filled temples, but the power of scent remains eternal. And in this way, the ancient Egyptians continue to teach us the profound significance of fragrance, not just as a luxury, but as a way of connecting with the past, with the divine, and with each other. As we begin to wind down our exploration of ancient Egyptian perfumery, we find ourselves at a crucial intersection, the mysteries of the past meeting the modern world. The Egyptians were not just pioneers of perfume making, but they were also key players in the larger story of trade, global exchange, and cultural diffusion. The perfume trade of ancient Egypt didn't simply stay within the borders of the Nile River. It traveled across continents, affecting cultures far and wide. And even today, the ancient principles of Egyptian perfumery continue to shape global fragrance culture. To understand just how far-reaching Egypt's influence was, we need to look at the global trade routes that the Egyptians developed over thousands of years. Egypt's perfume industry was one of its most lucrative exports, and its trade networks extended far beyond the African continent. Egyptian frankincense, myrrh, and lotus were prized commodities, shipped along trade routes that connected Africa with the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and even parts of Asia. The ancient Egyptians understood that perfume wasn't just a luxury for the rich. It was a commodity, one that could be traded for other goods, strengthening Egypt's economic position in the ancient world. This trade of sacred and exotic scents didn't just serve an economic function, it played a vital role in the exchange of cultural practices. Egypt's perfume-making techniques influenced neighboring civilizations, including the Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans. By the time the Greeks took over the perfume trade, they had adapted many of the Egyptian methods, adding their own twists to create signature fragrances that would influence perfume making for centuries. When Rome came to power, the use of perfume spread further, and by this time, the ancient Egyptians had already cemented their position as the founders of modern perfumery. Historians still debate the extent of Egypt's influence on perfume making in other civilizations. Did the Egyptians set the foundation for the perfumes we know today? Or did other cultures contribute just as much to the art? Some scholars believe the Egyptians were the pioneers of perfume, creating both the materials and techniques that the rest of the world would later adopt. Others argue that the perfume trade was a shared cultural phenomenon, one that was shaped by multiple civilizations, with Egypt playing a central but not singular role. Regardless of who gets credit for what, it's undeniable that Egypt's influence on the perfume trade and its eventual globalization is still felt in the perfume industry today. This widespread diffusion of Egyptian perfume making is reflected in the diversity of modern-day perfume houses. From the luxury perfume brands that use resins like myrrh and frankincense to create their most coveted scents, to the rise of artisan perfumeries that specialize in using ancient ingredients in their blends, the influence of Egypt's ancient fragrances is undeniable. In fact, many of the ingredients the Egyptians used are still considered some of the most sought after in the modern perfume industry. Today's perfumers still rely on natural resins, oils, and herbs like those the Egyptians used, creating modern fragrances that carry a touch of that ancient Egyptian mystique. The ingredients that the Egyptians used have also led to a growing demand for sustainable sourcing. As modern perfume consumers become more aware of the environmental impact of fragrance production, there's a return to natural, sustainable ingredients, just as the Egyptians once sourced their oils and resins from the earth. The shift towards more sustainable practices in the perfume industry is not only a nod to the past, but it's also part of the broader movement toward ethical production in modern-day luxury goods. One of the most interesting aspects of Egyptian perfumery's influence today is its connection to spirituality. The Egyptians believed that scent could elevate one's spiritual state, and that the act of burning incense or wearing perfume was a way to connect with the divine. In modern times, this belief persists in certain spiritual communities, where incense is still burned in temples and meditation spaces to promote clarity, focus, and a connection to the divine. Some perfumers today even market their creations as spiritual tools, aligning their perfumes with the ancient Egyptian idea of scent as a vehicle for spiritual transcendence. And let's not forget the role that perfume as luxury still plays in modern society. The ancient Egyptians were perhaps the first to commodify scent in a way that symbolized status. In the same way, modern perfume brands, especially those that specialize in exclusive or limited edition fragrances, still cater to the luxury market, with perfumes often serving as a status symbol. The more expensive the perfume, the more it communicates wealth and sophistication, much like the lavish perfumes of the Egyptian elite. So, what does the continued influence of Egyptian perfumery mean for us today? Well, in many ways, we are still living in the legacy of ancient Egypt's perfume industry. The perfumes we wear, the incense we burn and the oils we use in aromatherapy are direct descendants of the practices that began thousands of years ago along the Nile. While the ingredients and techniques have evolved, the core principles of connection, expression, and ritual remain central to the role that fragrance plays in our lives. We've seen how the Egyptians crafted not just perfumes, but a philosophy around scent, one that bridged the gap between the physical and the spiritual, between the mortal and the divine. Whether it was a fragrance designed to honor the gods, protect the body, or connect with the afterlife, perfume was always far more than just an accessory. It was an experience. And as we continue to wear and appreciate fragrances in our own time, we honor this ancient tradition. As we approach the final stretch of our journey through the fragrant corridors of ancient Egypt, let's reflect on something even more significant: the timelessness of scent itself. There is something almost paradoxical about how fragrance, as a tool of communication, can transcend centuries, remaining as powerful and evocative today as it was in the time of the pharaohs. In Egypt, perfume was not just a way of smelling good. It was a sacred practice, a form of cultural expression, and a medium that connected the living with the divine. Now, perfume's legacy endures not just in the lingering scents of modern perfumes, but in how scent continues to shape our experiences and our memories. Think about the way a particular scent can evoke a moment from your past. A whiff of jasmine, for example, might take you back to a specific moment in time, a place, a person, or a memory. It's the same with the ancient Egyptians. The fragrances they created were meant to do much more than just smell good. They were tools of memory. Scents were linked to identity, ritual, and legacy, creating olfactory bridges to the past and the spiritual realms. For the Egyptians, perfume was a powerful memory trigger, a tool that helped them to not only remember the gods, but also to stay connected with their cultural heritage. The fragrances worn by kings, queens, and everyday Egyptians carried with them the essence of Egypt itself, its values, beliefs, and spiritual practices. And much like how today's perfumes are designed to elicit specific emotional responses, Egyptian perfumes were carefully crafted to evoke certain spiritual states and to help the wearer connect to the divine. Scents were used to honor the gods, to protect the body, and to signify power. And in each bottle, the Egyptians encapsulated their understanding of the world. When a pharaoh wore perfume, it wasn't just about luxury, it was about projecting divine power. The use of frankincense, myrrh, and lotus oils was a ritual act, a means of connecting with the divine order that governed life on earth and beyond. Similarly, when priests burned incense, it wasn't just to create a pleasant atmosphere. It was part of a ritual that helped ensure the balance of the universe. Perfume, therefore, became a medium for both communication and preservation, a way to remember, revere, and relate to something much greater than oneself.
The power of fragrance as a memory maker is still evident in our world today. Think about how some perfumes are synonymous with moments in time. A favorite scent from your childhood, or the fragrance worn by someone important to you, can instantly transport you to a specific moment in your past. That's the magic of scent, its ability to form an emotional connection to both time and place. The Egyptians, too, understood this power. Their perfumes were a way to connect to history and to ensure that even after death, they would be remembered and revered. Incense, for example, was burned in temples, creating an atmosphere that helped the Egyptians connect with the gods on a sensory level. It was part of the ritual of worship, and its fragrance was seen as a symbolic offering to the divine. By burning incense, the Egyptians believed that they were sending their prayers to the gods, carried on the smoke and scent. Similarly, the perfumes they wore are a way of aligning themselves with the divine order, ensuring that their scent was one of purity, blessing, and power. For the pharaohs, the fragrance was more than just an adornment. It was a symbol of their sacred role as intermediaries between the gods and the people. The concept of immortality was at the heart of Egyptian society, and perfume was a key player in their understanding of life after death. When the Egyptians mummified their dead, they used fragrant oils and resins to preserve the body and ensure its safe passage to the afterlife. These sacred scents were believed to be necessary for protection, preservation, and guidance. The use of myrrh and frankincense in the mummification process wasn't just a ritual of physical preservation. It was a way of ensuring that the soul of the deceased would be safe, protected, and preserved in both the physical and spiritual realms. The act of burning incense during funerary rites also played a role in creating a connection between the living and the dead, ensuring that the deceased would not be forgotten, but would always be remembered. And yet, even though the ancient Egyptians are long gone, their fragrance legacy still lingers in our world. Modern perfumers still rely on the same ingredients that the Egyptians used, and the very act of creating a fragrance remains an artistic and cultural practice that mirrors the ancient Egyptians' respect for scent as something far more than just a luxury item. Egyptian perfumes were the beginning of a tradition that spread across the Mediterranean, into Europe, and ultimately the whole world. As modern perfume houses look to history for inspiration, the Egyptians remain a touchstone for their craft. The more we learn about ancient Egyptian perfumery, the more we realize just how ahead of their time the Egyptians were. They didn't just create beautiful scents, they understood the power of fragrance to influence the mind, body, and soul. They understood that scent could be a bridge between the earthly and the divine, between the living and the dead. This understanding continues to influence our use of fragrance today, from luxury perfumes to spiritual practices like incense burning. So, as we finish this exploration of ancient Egyptian perfumery, take a moment to appreciate how these ancient scents still shape our world. Whether it's the perfume you wear, the incense you burn, or the oils you use for relaxation, the ancient Egyptians' legacy continues to influence how we use fragrance in our lives. The more we reflect on it, the more we realize that, in many ways, we are still participating in the same rituals that the Egyptians practiced over 3,000 years ago. We're still using scent to remember, connect, and communicate. The power of perfume has never faded. It's merely evolved, keeping the ancient wisdom of Egypt alive and well in our modern world. As we reach the closing chapters of our exploration into ancient Egyptian perfumery, let's take a moment to reflect on how the ancient Egyptians understood creativity and artistry in their perfume making. The art of perfumery, like many other aspects of Egyptian culture, was not just a functional craft. It was deeply connected to art, expression, and ritual. The Egyptians didn't simply create perfumes for personal use. They approached perfume making as a form of sacred creation, a way to elevate the mundane into something divine. The very containers that held these precious oils were works of art themselves. Perfume jars in Egypt were often crafted from glass, stone, or clay, and many were intricately decorated with scenes of gods, pharaohs, and sacred symbols. The craftsmanship was exquisite, as the Egyptians believed that the perfume itself was a sacred substance, deserving of a container that was equally sacred. Much like the perfume, the vessels in which they were kept weren't just functional. They were a reflection of divine favor, a visual extension of the power the scent was meant to communicate. The art of creating these vessels mirrored the craftsmanship used to create the fragrances themselves. Both were about infusing the everyday with the extraordinary, turning simple materials into something that could invoke the divine. In this way, Egyptian perfumery was a deeply creative practice, one that required skill and artistry. The process of blending resins, oils, and flowers wasn't simply about mixing ingredients, it was about creating a sensory experience. Ancient Egyptian perfumers had to have a deep understanding of how different elements combined, not just in terms of scent, but in terms of emotional and spiritual resonance. Just as painters blended colors to create a powerful image, perfumers blended ingredients to create something that could affect the soul, calm the spirit, or invoke the divine. This was, at its core, an act of creation, a skill that combined art with alchemy, where each perfume wasn't just a scent, but a complete experience. In fact, one of the most striking things about Egyptian perfumery is how it reflects the Egyptian worldview, which saw art, nature, and the divine as intricately intertwined. The Egyptians didn't view their world as separate from their gods. Rather, they saw everything, the earth, the animals, the flowers, the rivers, as imbued with divine presence. This connection to the divine permeated all aspects of life, including the creation of perfumes. Just as a sculpture or painting might reflect divine beauty or power, a perfume crafted by the Egyptians was meant to capture the essence of the divine. It was a way of manifesting the intangible, of making the invisible world of gods and spirits visible, felt, and experienced through scent. The act of wearing perfume in the Egyptian context was not just about personal enjoyment or self-expression. It was a way of bringing the divine presence into the everyday world. Pharaohs, priests, and nobility used perfume to elevate themselves, to make their actions seem divinely inspired, and to bring themselves closer to the gods. In a sense, perfume making was a ritualistic art, blending sacred ingredients to create something that was both art and spiritual offering. This is why the Egyptians didn't just create perfumes. They breathed life into them, imbuing each scent with a divine purpose. In modern times, we still approach perfume making as an art form, though the spiritual significance has often been replaced by personal preference and aesthetic choice. Yet, the tradition of artistry and creativity in perfume making endures. Perfume houses around the world still pride themselves on crafting unique and expressive scents that evoke specific emotions, memories, or experiences. Just as the Egyptians once created fragrances that were meant to connect with the gods, today's perfumers create fragrances that connect us to our emotions, to our personal stories, and to our sense of self. But while modern perfumery may no longer serve the divine purpose it once did, the art of fragrance creation remains a deeply personal and creative process. Like the Egyptians, we use perfume as a tool to communicate, to express our identity, and to create a sensory experience that goes beyond just smelling good. Today, we may use perfume to project power, to mark significant moments in our lives, or simply to add a touch of beauty to our everyday existence. In this way, we continue the ancient Egyptian tradition of using scent as a form of expression, a way to connect the physical and the spiritual, the mortal and the immortal. As we draw closer to the end of our exploration, let's take a moment to reflect on how scent is still one of the most powerful and evocative sensory experiences we can have. Whether you're wearing your favorite perfume, lighting incense during a meditation session, or simply enjoying the fragrance of a blooming flower, you are participating in a practice that spans thousands of years, a practice that links us to the ancient Egyptians and to the deep, timeless power of scent. Perfume, like art, transcends time. It moves beyond just the luxury and pleasure it provides, serving as a bridge to something deeper, something spiritual and eternal. The Egyptians understood this better than anyone, which is why their legacy of fragrance creation remains as vital today as it was in the time of the pharaohs. Now let's move into one of the most intriguing aspects of our journey, the rediscovery of Egyptian perfumery and its place in modern scientific inquiry. As we've already seen, the ancient Egyptians were pioneers, not only in creating lasting fragrances, but also in understanding the deeper implications of scent. But what happens when modern scholars and scientists try to understand the legacy of this ancient art using today's technology? How have modern discoveries allowed us to resurrect the scents that once filled the air of the ancient Nile? In recent decades, the field of archaeology and chemical analysis has brought remarkable advancements to the study of ancient Egyptian perfumes. The study of ancient residues found in tombs, jars, and sacred spaces has enabled researchers to gain a glimpse into the ingredients and methods that made up the perfumes of Egypt. One of the most groundbreaking discoveries occurred in 1994 when scientists analyzed the perfume residue found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. This discovery allowed modern chemists to identify trace elements of frankincense, myrrh, and cinnamon, just as they would have been used by the pharaohs. These residues weren't just fragments of an ancient luxury. They were the actual remnants of the powerful fragrances the Egyptians used in their sacred rituals. The study of these ancient perfumes has opened the door to recreating the scents of Egypt. By carefully analyzing the chemical compounds found in the residues and comparing them to modern-day equivalents, researchers have begun the complex process of rebuilding ancient fragrances. This isn't just about resurrecting a pleasant scent. It's about reconnecting with the sensory history of ancient Egypt and understanding how these fragrances were meant to be experienced, not just through smell, but through the spiritual atmosphere they created. As part of this research, some modern perfumers have teamed up with archaeologists to craft perfumes that closely resemble those used in religious ceremonies and royal rituals. But while recreating these fragrances is a significant accomplishment, it's not without its challenges. The ancient Egyptians didn't have the same refined techniques for scent extraction that we do today, and many of the methods they used have been lost over time. For example, the Egyptians employed techniques like maceration, where plant materials were steeped in oil, and distillation, where steam was used to separate essential oils from the plant material. These methods, while effective, were not as precise as modern distillation and extraction techniques. As a result, modern scientists are forced to piece together the clues left behind in ancient residues, recreating a fragrance based not only on the ingredients, but also on an ancient intuition that modern perfumers are still trying to grasp. Modern scientists still debate the full significance of Egyptian perfumery in terms of its original purpose. Was it simply for creating beauty, or was it deeply entwined with the spiritual and magical practices of the time? Some scholars suggest that perfume was seen as a mediator between the physical world and the spiritual world. This aligns with the Egyptian belief that scent had the power to transform the mundane into the divine. The role of fragrance in creating ritual atmospheres for the gods, and the protection it was thought to offer during the afterlife, is something we can only begin to understand. However, in modern perfume making, there is a resurgence of interest in these ideas. Today's luxury perfumes still draw upon these ancient principles of sacred and ritualistic fragrance. They tap into the same psychological and emotional responses that the Egyptians likely understood when they developed their perfumes. In addition to the physical science of perfume making, there is a growing interest in the psychological impact of scent, which was also a key component of ancient Egyptian perfumery. Researchers are increasingly discovering that fragrance has a direct effect on our mood, memory, and emotional well-being. This aligns with the Egyptian belief that scent could influence everything from physical health to spiritual enlightenment. Modern studies into the effects of aromatherapy reveal that scent can calm the mind, promote healing, and even improve cognitive function. The Egyptians knew, even without the scientific backing we have today, that fragrance was a powerful tool for influencing and shaping the human experience. While modern science and technology have given us new tools for understanding and recreating ancient perfumes, one thing remains unchanged: the importance of scent in human life. The Egyptians understood that fragrance wasn't just about luxury. It was about connecting with the divine, expressing power, and creating an atmosphere of purity, protection, and transcendence. The ability of scent to influence the spiritual and emotional states of the wearer or the worshipper is something we still deeply value today. Whether through luxury perfumes, incense for meditation, or even healing oils, scent continues to shape our lives in ways that resonate with the wisdom of ancient cultures. It's clear that the Egyptians didn't just leave us a collection of fragrant oils. They left us a legacy of sensory experiences that continue to influence us today. From the ancient mummies of the pharaohs to the modern perfume houses that recreate these ancient scents, we're still connecting to the world of Egypt through the power of fragrance. We may have modern technology and science on our side, but in many ways, we are still using the same principles that the ancient Egyptians laid down. Perfume has become something timeless, something that transcends time, culture, and geography. And it all began in ancient Egypt, where perfume was not just a tool for beauty, but a sacred practice that linked the living to the divine and the present to the eternal. As we approach the final stretch of our journey, it's time to consider the cultural transmission of Egyptian perfumery, how its artistic principles and techniques were absorbed and adapted by other ancient cultures, and how this ancient Egyptian legacy continues to influence modern perfumery today. The ancient Egyptians weren't the only ones who appreciated the power of scent. As Egypt flourished along the Nile, the rich and intoxicating perfumes crafted by their skilled artisans began to spread along the extensive trade routes that connected Egypt to the rest of the world. Egypt's perfume trade was deeply intertwined with its influence in the Mediterranean, the Near East, and beyond. And as these ideas traveled, they were absorbed into various cultures, adapted, and ultimately became cornerstones of global perfume traditions. One of the most notable recipients of Egyptian perfumery knowledge was the ancient Greeks. When the Greeks encountered Egyptian culture, they were captivated by the luxury and spiritual significance of the Egyptian perfumes. It wasn't long before Greek society adopted these perfume-making techniques and began experimenting with their own blends. Greek perfumers, particularly those in cities like Athens and Alexandria, began creating their own versions of the incense and oils that had made Egypt famous. They didn't simply imitate Egyptian perfumes. They made them their own, integrating local plants and resins into their creations, which resulted in a distinctly Greek approach to fragrance. The Greeks were also deeply influenced by the spiritual and ritualistic significance of Egyptian perfumes. Like the Egyptians, the Greeks believed that certain scents had the power to heal the body, uplift the mind, and invoke divine presence. Their use of perfume in religious ceremonies, temples, and as personal adornment echoed the Egyptian belief that scent could facilitate a deeper connection to the gods. Over time, the Greeks also developed advanced techniques of distillation and began to use perfumes in a more everyday context, not just for rituals or status, but also for personal use in daily life. The most significant spread of Egyptian perfume making came with the rise of Rome. Rome, ever the adopter of Greek and Egyptian cultural elements, took the art of perfumery and incense burning to new heights. Roman society, much like the Egyptians, used scent as a luxury, but the Romans took it a step further by introducing the idea of using fragrance as a tool for self-expression. Roman elites, much like Egyptian royalty, used perfumes to project power, divinity, and prestige. They wore perfumes during public events, used them in their baths, and offered them to the gods in their temples. Roman society also began producing their own signature perfumes, using ingredients from both Egypt and local Mediterranean sources. This intercultural exchange of perfume-making knowledge was a cornerstone of the Roman approach to luxury and personal care. It wasn't just in the Mediterranean that Egyptian perfumery made its mark. The influence of Egyptian trade routes and artisanal techniques reached as far as Persia, India, and even China. Trade caravans carried frankincense and myrrh to distant lands, where the materials were adopted and woven into local traditions. While each region adapted the methods to their own cultures, the Egyptian legacy of creating perfumes for both ritualistic and everyday purposes remained a guiding influence. In fact, many of the raw materials used in Egyptian perfumes, like frankincense, myrrh, sandalwood, and lotus, are still valued today for their spiritual significance and therapeutic properties. Many modern perfumers still turn to these classic ingredients to create fragrances that connect to the ancient past, grounding their compositions in the traditions of the first perfume makers. This continuity is a testament to the lasting power of Egypt's perfume legacy and how deeply ingrained scent is in the human experience, transcending time and culture. In the modern perfume industry, the Egyptian influence is perhaps most visible in the luxury market, where high-end perfume houses still honor the ancient tradition of creating fragrances with a deeper, almost spiritual purpose. Fragrance houses such as Chanel, Dior, and Tom Ford often use ingredients that have their roots in Egyptian perfumery, such as frankincense, myrrh, and oud. These luxurious scents are often associated with both rich history and divine luxury, just as the Egyptians once crafted their perfumes for the pharaohs and priests. Today, perfumery has become a global industry, with niche brands paying homage to the Egyptian roots of luxury fragrances. For example, niche perfume brands like Amouage and Creed are known for using ingredients that hark back to ancient Egypt, particularly oud, a rare, fragrant resin that was used in Egyptian rituals and is still considered one of the most precious substances in modern perfumery. The resurgence of interest in natural, ancient ingredients in today's fragrance world reflects the continuing influence of Egypt's perfume-making tradition, even in the most modern iterations of scent-making. Through all of this, one thing becomes clear. The Egyptians were the pioneers of perfume, creating not just fragrances, but an entire cultural and spiritual practice that continues to influence us today. Their knowledge, passed down through trade, cultural exchange, and scientific inquiry, has transcended generations and still shapes how we experience scent. The luxury we associate with perfume today, the rituals surrounding its use, and the very ingredients we rely on, all have their origins in the ancient Egyptian perfumery tradition. So, the next time you wear your favorite fragrance, light incense, or use essential oils for relaxation, take a moment to appreciate the ancient legacy that still lingers in the air. You are connecting to a tradition that spans thousands of years, one that began in the temples of Egypt and continues to thrive in the modern world. Fragrance is not just a tool for smelling good. It is a bridge to the past, a sensory link that connects us to the spiritual, the timeless, and the divine. As we come to the final moments of this exploration of ancient Egyptian perfumery, let's pause to reflect on how this ancient art form continues to influence not just the world of fragrance, but the human connection to history, memory, and even identity. The legacy of perfume making in Egypt is a profound one, reaching far beyond just the aromatics of oils and incense, extending into the cultural and spiritual fabric of society itself. One of the most striking aspects of ancient Egyptian perfumery is its symbolic depth. Fragrance for the Egyptians was not simply a matter of personal adornment or indulgence. It was deeply interwoven with their religious beliefs, their spiritual practices, and their relationship with the divine. Perfume wasn't just about wearing a pleasing scent. It was about establishing a connection, whether with the gods, the afterlife, or even with one's own immortal soul. This relationship between scent and spirituality has transcended millennia, that it's something we still connect with today, even if we don't always realize it. Perfume in ancient Egypt was a sacred offering, used in rituals to please the gods, a vehicle for prayer that could carry words and intentions beyond the physical realm. The Egyptians believed that by burning incense or wearing perfume, they were inviting the gods into their lives, creating a sacred space where the divine could descend. This idea that fragrance could transcend earthly realms and connect the spiritual with the physical is one of the most profound legacies of Egyptian perfumery. Today, we don't typically associate perfume with religious rituals in the same way. But as we've seen, the act of wearing a fragrance or lighting incense still serves many of the same functions. Whether in spiritual practices like meditation, yoga, or rituals of worship, scent continues to have a transformative power. The rituals of the Egyptians, who believed that scent could purify and elevate, continue to resonate through modern practices where scent is used for healing, mental clarity, and divine connection. It's a living legacy of their profound understanding of how fragrance interacts with the human spirit. Modern aromatherapy takes direct inspiration from the Egyptians' ancient use of essential oils. The healing properties of oils like myrrh and frankincense are recognized today for their calming, anti-inflammatory, and antibacterial properties. The Egyptians may not have understood these substances in the scientific terms we do today, but they knew instinctively that certain scents could heal the body and calm the mind. In this sense, the connection between fragrance and well-being is just as relevant now as it was in Egypt. Beyond their spiritual and medicinal uses, perfumes also had an essential role in the personal identity of Egyptians. For the pharaohs and nobles, perfume was not only a symbol of luxury, it was a way to project power, divinity, and status. The act of wearing perfume was an assertion of authority, a visual and olfactory expression of one's elevated place in society. The scent of a ruler, a queen, or a priest carried with it a deeper symbolism, invoking their connection to the gods and their divine right to rule. This idea of personal fragrance as a tool for projecting power is still present in modern perfumery, where the fragrance you wear often communicates something about who you are, your status, your personality, or your sense of individuality. However, in a more intimate sense, perfume also connects us to our memories and emotions. Much like the Egyptians who used scent to mark spiritual and emotional milestones, we use fragrance to evoke specific moments in time, connect with loved ones, or relive memories. The use of fragrance as memory is universal across cultures and has deep historical roots in the Egyptian practice of associating scent with pivotal events, whether it be the birth of a child, a marriage, or the passing of a loved one. The Egyptians' understanding of fragrance as an emotional tool continues to inform our modern relationship with scent. As we look at the broader impact of Egyptian perfumery, we see that its influence extends well beyond the luxury market. The global perfume industry that exists today, an industry worth billions, is built upon the same principles that the Egyptians established thousands of years ago. They created something that was more than just an industry or a marketplace. They created a language of scent, one that still speaks to us today. From the raw materials like myrrh and frankincense to the ritualistic use of fragrance, the Egyptians set the foundation for a practice that is now deeply embedded in our modern culture. Looking back at the grand sweep of history, we realize that Egyptian perfumery was not just an ancient luxury or a passing trend, it was an integral part of Egyptian culture, philosophy, and spirituality. Today, the legacy of Egyptian scent-making is not only alive in the perfumes we wear and the incense we burn, but in how we use fragrance to shape our identities, express our emotions, and connect to the divine. As we close this chapter on ancient Egyptian perfumery, we can see how timeless their understanding of scent truly was. Whether it's the ritualistic use of incense in our worship, the healing power of essential oils, or the way we choose a fragrance to project our identity, the ancient Egyptians taught us that scent is more than just a physical experience. It is a spiritual and emotional connection to both the past and the present. Fragrance, like memory, is something that stays with us, an invisible, ethereal force that transcends time and place. With that, the scent of ancient Egypt still lingers in our world today, not just in the ingredients we use, but in the memories and rituals that we continue to carry forward. The ancient Egyptians gave us more than just perfumes. They gave us a legacy of scent, one that remains as relevant and sacred today as it was in the time of the pharaohs. As we reach the final section of our journey through the ancient Egyptian world of perfumery, let's pause to reflect on what we've learned and what this deep dive into the world of fragrance has to offer us in the present day. From the creation of perfumes for religious ceremonies to the power of scent as a spiritual tool, the Egyptians taught us that perfume is far more than just a luxury or a simple beauty aid. It is an integral part of the human experience, weaving together culture, spirituality, and memory. At the core of Egyptian perfumery was an understanding that scent had the ability to affect the soul. It could heal, protect, and even connect the living with the divine. Fragrances weren't just about personal adornment. They were powerful agents that interacted with both the spiritual and physical realms. This perspective on scent was far ahead of its time, and it's something we can still learn from today. While modern perfumery may not serve the same ritualistic purposes, the deep connection we have with fragrance today mirrors the same human instincts that the Egyptians relied upon centuries ago. In our modern world, perfume is often seen as a way to project identity and status, much as it was in ancient Egypt. The luxury perfume market is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and many of today's most popular fragrances still rely on the ancient ingredients that the Egyptians used: frankincense, myrrh, lotus, and cedarwood. These time-tested materials not only evoke a sense of luxury, but they carry with them a deep cultural significance, reminding us that the act of wearing fragrance is not only an aesthetic choice, but a deeply human one. But the lasting influence of Egyptian perfumery isn't just about luxury goods and high-end products. The spiritual importance of scent is still alive and well today. In fact, the use of incense and essential oils for spiritual practices, whether it's for meditation, yoga, or even simply relaxing, echoes the ancient Egyptian belief in the spiritual power of scent. Whether we use incense in our homes to create a peaceful atmosphere or essential oils to relieve stress, we are participating in a tradition that was born over 3,000 years ago. The Egyptians, with their deep reverence for the transformative power of fragrance, were the first to recognize that scent could change our emotional and spiritual states, and today, we continue to see fragrance as an important part of our wellness routines. Similarly, the use of scent in religious rituals continues to be deeply ingrained in modern practices. Incense is still burned in temples and churches around the world, and it remains a central part of spiritual gatherings and worship. Whether it's the smell of frankincense filling the air during a Catholic Mass or the sandalwood incense used in Buddhist ceremonies, the use of fragrance to connect with the divine is a practice that has its roots in Egypt. But beyond these cultural and spiritual connections, the legacy of Egyptian perfumery is also present in the way we experience scent today. The ancient Egyptians understood that scent has the power to evoke memories and emotions, and this is something we experience daily. Fragrances have the ability to take us back in time, transporting us to a moment, a place, or even a feeling. That power is timeless. Just as the Egyptians used fragrance to commemorate important moments and rituals, we too continue to use scent to mark our own personal milestones. The fact that so many of the ancient scents of Egypt are still used in modern perfumery shows just how deeply ingrained they are in our cultural memory. Myrrh, frankincense, and the lotus flower carry with them centuries of history, but they also carry with them the essence of human experience, ritual, emotion, memory, and connection. These ingredients, once used to honor the gods, are now used in perfumes that evoke a range of emotions, from calm and peace to luxury and mystique. The very same raw materials that the Egyptians used to create spiritual connections are now used to create an emotional experience for us, whether we're using perfume to feel empowered, relaxed, or confident. Even in a world full of synthetic fragrances, the ancient Egyptians left us with a powerful reminder that the natural world holds sacred power, and that the raw ingredients of nature can connect us to something greater than ourselves. The Egyptians were the first to understand that scent wasn't just a luxury, it was a sacred tool, a tool that could open pathways to the divine, evoke the spiritual, and create lasting memories. The next time you inhale the fragrance of your favorite perfume, incense, or essential oil, remember that you are participating in a tradition that goes back millennia, a tradition that connects you to the ancient Egyptians and their understanding of the power of scent. In conclusion, the ancient Egyptians didn't just create perfumes, they created a spiritual art form. Perfume was a medium through which they communicated with the gods, honored the dead, and connected their lives to the divine order. Today, their legacy lives on in the fragrances we wear, the incense we burn, and the oils we use for well-being. The profound understanding of the power of scent that the Egyptians had thousands of years ago still resonates with us today, reminding us of the timeless connection between scent and spirit, between the living and the divine. As you reflect on the journey of Egyptian perfumery, let the scents of today remind you that you are part of a long tradition, one that honors not just luxury, but the very spiritual essence of being human.